All right. We have some very eager people in the waiting room, so they were very patient. We're going to let them in, give them just a moment to get settled in over here in their virtual seats.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there you go. I always picture that. I still picture people coming through a doorway, even though it's virtual, but that's just
Yeah.
sort of my
That's right.
approach. But so hello everyone. Hello. We have a very special webinar today. Different day, different time. Because we have a very special guest today. We have Sharon Parkinson with us today from Emerald Publishing. And I am not going to waste a whole lot of time because she has some really amazing content for you. I got a sneak peek at her slides already. We also just have in the house today, because some of you may have questions that you want to direct to other people who are here at USDLA. We have Executive Director Pat Casella from USDLA here. We also have Vicki Brown, who is going to be a guest editor of a journal you're going to hear about today. And we have Mike Simonson. So I just want to welcome them as well, get their names and faces familiar to you. But for now, I'm going to pass things over to Sharon, and she's going to get started with our guide to getting published. Thank you for being here today, Sharon, and everyone else.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. And thank you for allowing me to do this. I'm really pleased to be partnering with the USDLA to deliver this session on how to get published. So yeah, I'm Sharon Parkinson, and I am the Education Publishing Lead at Emerald, and you'll hear a little bit more about who Emerald is in a moment. Just housekeeping type things, really. I'm happy to share the slides afterwards. I think they'll be passed on in some of the follow-up comms. So, you can refer back to the slides at a later date. You'll notice that my email address is also on this slide. So, feel free to reach out to me, contact me at any point in the future with questions or for guidance or, on something that you'd perhaps like to have published. So, yes, starting off with, who we are, who is Emerald. Some of you may not, in fact, most of you probably are not familiar with us. So we were founded almost 60 years ago. It's actually our 60th anniversary next year. And we were founded by a group of academics at the University of Bradford School of Management. We've now grown over those 60 years. We have offices all around the world. We now publish over 350 journals. We publish around 500 books every year. We have over 1,500 teaching cases, and all these products are predominantly in the social sciences areas, but we do have a growing number of sort of technical engineering titles as well. The research that we publish is very much quite, it's applied research, so there's a real focus on research to practice. We're very passionate about research for real world impact. And so in 2019, we signed something that's called the Declaration on Research Assessment, or DORA. We also created an impact manifesto and created some resources and toolkits to really help researchers to tell the story of their work and to help with that impact literacy piece. Our content database is called Emerald Insight, and we get about 45 million downloads every year on there. And finally, we're really committed to open research and to being able to offer authors flexible routes to publication and to really meet their needs. So open access is one such route, and I will touch on that shortly. So this is the agenda for today. I'm going to start by talking just generally about the distance learning research landscape. And then we'll get into the writing and the publishing process and really drill down into the nuts and bolts of getting published. Then I will introduce the quarterly review of distance education journal to you, for those of you who I'm sure that most of you are familiar with it, but I will be covering that. And then I'm hoping that we'll have like 5 or 10 minutes at the end for questions. So you can either come on screen or unmute and ask questions, or you can put things in the chat as we go along, and we'll try and address those at the end. But again, just to reiterate, my email address is there, so that if you do have questions afterwards that you think about further down the line, I'm more than happy for you to contact me. So the research landscape, I thought it could be quite an interesting exercise just to have a quick look at some of the research outputs in the field of distance learning, just to get a kind of a feel for the size of the area and you know, the general data and context. So this slide here, I used data from a platform called Dimensions, and Dimensions brings together stats and data around research outputs, research grants, publications, clinical trials, all kinds of things connected to research. It's really comprehensive. There's actually a free layer available for anybody to access. So I've put the web address on this slide in case you want to go in and have a little poke around in there later. So this is a 10-year picture. So since 2017, there's been a total of just over 45,000 outputs with the term distance learning, either in the title or in the abstract. And by outputs, by research outputs, we're really talking about journal articles and books and book chapters. And I think this graph tells a very clear story because we can see that pre-pandemic, the number of outputs kind of hovered around 1,500 every year. But then we saw this huge spike in 2020 and 2021, obviously when the pandemic hit and everything flipped to online learning and distance teaching and so on. So even though we're seeing that slide back down, it is kind of hovering at the sort of 3,000 mark now. So, it's fair to say that distance learning is a significant field of research. And this slide looks at, those 45,000 outputs in the past 10-year period. These people here to the left of the screen have had the largest number of publications. We can see that they've come from, a variety of different countries, and I'm not sure whether any of those names are familiar to anybody watching or in the call today. The other half of the slide shows the global distribution of research outputs, of those 45,000 research outputs. And the darker the blue, that indicates the higher number of outputs. The top 5 countries sort of publishing research in this field are, first of all, the US, and that leads by far, actually, followed by Indonesia, Russia, the UK, and Ukraine. So quite an interesting mix of countries there leading the research. Okay, so moving on to the main part of the session. I've called this a Publishing 101. As an author, you have lots of possible venues and outlets for your research or your practice papers, but for the purposes of this session, I'm going to focus on journals publishing. And of course, I represent Emerald and in particular, the Quarterly Review of Distance Education. But this is quite a publisher agnostic session. So, all the do's and the don'ts and the hints and the tips are pretty much universal across different publishers and journals. I've intentionally made the slides quite wordy so that everything is captured as a bit of a how-to guide. If you want to refer back to them later, then hopefully the slide deck will be quite informative. And as I said, they will be shared with you afterwards. Okay, so how to select the right journal. I've put this one first because ideally, you should have a journal in mind before you start writing. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but it's because you want to maximize your chances of being accepted for publication. So if you have that journal in mind when you write, you're going to increase your chances of being accepted. And I would say that choosing the right journal to publish in is an investment decision, because a good choice will really enhance the impact of your work, but it will also enhance your reputation. And the things to consider, or the questions that you might want to answer to help you make your choice, are around things like the readership. So will it reach who you want it to reach? What kind of articles have you recently published or have been recently published in that journal? And do they align to the work that you're looking to publish? Is the journal linked to a society that you recognise? Is it international in coverage and reach, if that's important to you? What's the acceptance rate? How many downloads does the journal achieve every year? And what's the time from submission to publication? So these could be things that are important to you, so you can find those out beforehand. If you're at a university, find out whether your institution or your department has a list of approved journals, because if so, it may be that you need to publish in a journal that's on that list. Think about the type of paper that you're planning to write. So is it a practice paper? Is it a research paper, a case study, a review, or is it a viewpoint? You need to know what types of papers each journal accepts, because they all publish different things. And do you need to publish open access? So, and if so, do you have funds to cover an article processing charge? I'll point out at this stage that you can publish open access with any Emerald journal, and that includes the quarterly review of distance education. And then quality, think about those quality markers. Are rankings, for instance, important to you? The Web of Science and Scopus are the most well-known of the rankings out there, but there are others. And citations are an indicator of quality. They don't always tell the full picture. But if you are interested in knowing about how the journal performs in terms of citations, you can look at the impact factor, the Scopus site score, the H index on Google Scholar, but also think about usage of the journal, social media attention that it gets, and also peer perception. What is the reputation of the journal within your circles? And then how do you actually get started? So if you can answer yes to any of these questions, then essentially you have got the basis for a publishable paper. So have you completed a project that's concluded successfully? Because a completed project will often contain methods, findings, lessons learned, or outcomes that can be turned into a structured article. Even if it's small in scale, if it's a clearly defined project with some measurable results, it will give you a strong foundation for, say, a case study or a research article or a practice paper. Are you wrestling with a problem that has no clear solutions? Unresolved challenges can make excellent scholarly contributions. And, you could publish a conceptual paper or a discussion piece or a problem framing article that maps the issue or explores why solutions perhaps fall short. And you can propose new avenues for inquiry or practice. Do you have an opinion or an observation or, anything like that on a subject? Original insights, especially those that are informed by experience or emerging trends or gaps that you've perhaps noticed, they can form the basis of a commentary or a viewpoint or an opinion article. And these are really valuable because, they can offer really thoughtful critique or new perspectives or question existing assumptions. Have you given a presentation or a briefing or written a conference paper? Again, conference outputs particularly are often early versions of publishable work. So if you've already structured ideas enough to be able to present them publicly at a conference, then it's very likely that you have the foundation for a full paper. And expanding and developing those slides or that briefing into a manuscript is quite a common pathway to publication. You could be working on a doctoral or master's thesis, and these are very rich sources of publishable material. So individual chapters such as a literature review or the methodology or the findings can often be developed into standalone papers, and journals really value well-designed empirical studies, and postgraduate work typically meets that threshold and meets those high standards. And finally, do you have a new idea or an initiative? So innovative practices or pilot studies or emerging models, they can often be turned into practice-based papers, or even like conceptual articles or just short communications. So even very early stage thinking can be publishable if it contributes something novel or useful or thought-provoking to the field. Okay, so let's get into the weeds of the actual writing. So I would say that this slide is perhaps the most important slide of this presentation, because it essentially outlines what it is that editors and reviewers are looking for when they are reviewing an article. So originality, what is new or different about the work? Has the author made clear the relevance to and the extension of existing knowledge? Is the research methodology appropriate and robust to allow those conclusions to be valid and objective? Does the work communicate well? Does it have clarity and structure and quality of writing? Is there a sound logical progression of the argument? Are there theoretical and practical implications, that's also known as the so what factors? Are the references recent and relevant? Is there an international focus? Not that that's critical, but, does it have international significance or learnings? Does it fall within the editorial scope of the journal? That seems obvious, but you would be surprised at how many papers are rejected simply because the topic falls outside of the scope of the journal. And does it have a good title and relevant keywords and a well-written abstract? So you can think of this really as a checklist, and make sure that all these boxes are ticked. Okay, so moving on to the title and the keywords. These next few slides actually are gonna kind of break down what's needed from the different elements that make up a paper. And we're starting with the title and the keywords because this is the first thing that the reader will see. And often it's the thing that helps them to decide whether or not they'll continue and will read your work. So think of this as the shop window, and try and put yourself in the reader's shoes. Think of it from their point of view. What would you be looking for if you were a reader? What would appeal to you? What keywords would you use? So a good title should ideally have the fewest possible number of words, but still clearly describe what the paper is about. It obviously needs to introduce the paper and really represent the work to catch the reader's eye. The keywords should really identify the focus of the work. So obviously researchers search using keywords and key phrases. So what would you search for? What do other papers use for keywords, that are in a similar area to what you're publishing? And do they, when you use those keywords, do they give good results and results that you would expect? Be descriptive, using words that describe the topic, but also the discipline or the subdiscipline. The methodology is always a good keyword to use, and of course, any other significant features. And then just a kind of a word of warning about jargon. Keywords should really reflect a collective understanding of the subject. So be cautious if you use anything that's too gimmicky, because it might not travel well and it might not be surfaced. And then repeat appropriately. So don't be afraid to use the same words in, as you know, the keywords and the title and the abstract, because this will give you maximum visibility and ensure that the article is surfaced by potential readers. So the introduction, so once the reader opens the article, the introduction is the first thing that they're going to see. And this is where you really need to convince them that your work is relevant and that it answers any questions that they might have. So it would typically answer these questions here that are on screen. So what is the problem? What are the existing solutions, if any? Which one is the best? What is the limitation of that? And what is it that you hope to achieve in your paper with your research? Moving on to the methods. So the title, the abstract, and the conclusion are the sections where the authors will present their, the key conclusions that they draw from their study. Now, whether or not these conclusions are valid can only be assessed by studying the detail in the methodology section. Editors and reviewers of journals often reject papers because they draw conclusions that are not backed up by the findings from their study. So publishing articles that draw invalid conclusions, it misleads the readers, and it essentially undermines society's trust in scholarly research. So it's a core role of academic journals to ensure that conclusions are valid, because a study is only as good as the method used. So what you need to do is clearly state the main methods that were used. Was it qualitative? So for example, interviews, focus groups, or a case study. Was it quantitative, for instance, surveys or experiments, or was it mixed methods? You need to demonstrate that the methodology was robust and appropriate to the objectives. And obviously focus on telling the main story, state the main stages of your research, the methods that were used, the influences that determined your approach, and why you chose particular samples and so on. If you need to, you can always use the appendices for any additional details. So the results, some people may choose to wrap up the results into the discussion part of the paper, and we'll be looking at that next. But either way, the results do need to be clearly communicated. So focus on the essentials, highlight only the findings that directly answer your research questions or carry broader importance. Avoid overwhelming the reader with every single data point. Reserve the detail for what truly moves the argument forward. Identify what really matters. Draw attention to the results that are the most meaningful or perhaps the most surprising. And these should be the findings that really shape your discussion section and influence your interpretation and really connect back to your study's aims. You need to keep it clear and uncluttered. So where you can, we would advise using tables or charts or summaries, really just to improve that clarity and to help the readers to absorb the key messages quickly. And again, use the appendices for extra detail. So, if you have some data sets or something like that, put them in the appendices, and it keeps the main narrative more streamlined without losing transparency. So the discussion section will often, it's not necessarily called discussion, but it could be called something like interpretation of results, or discussion and implications, or analysis and interpretation. You could call it whatever you like, but there must essentially be a discussion part of the paper. And the key points really to emphasize here are that you need to interpret your findings clearly, explain what each major result means and not just what it shows, help the reader to understand the significance of those findings within the context of the research and the question or the framework. Compare with existing literature. Discuss whether your results align with or differ from previous studies. So if there are any discrepancies, you could perhaps here explore the possible reasons. It could be the methodological difference or the sample characteristics or, theoretical explanations, but acknowledge the limitations by being really transparent about any constraints, such as the sample size or the design choices or unexpected variables. This will strengthen the credibility of the work, and it also sets up a more thoughtful conclusion. Ensure that there's a really logical flow to the conclusion. This discussion section should naturally progress toward the final argument. So each point you make should support the broader implications and build towards the conclusion section. And then some things to, avoid, some pitfalls, if you like. Don't overstate your claims, so only draw conclusions that your results can support. Because, unsupported speculation or overly strong claims really weaken the paper's credibility. And of course, don't introduce new ideas or jargon or terms at this point. The discussion is for explaining your results, not for raising new concepts or theories or data that haven't been prepared earlier in the paper. And then the conclusion. So obviously, when you reach the conclusion, this is where you're aiming to bring everything together in a very clear and purposeful way. So start by answering the original research question directly. This is the chance to show the reader how your work has delivered on its promise. Avoid drifting into summary mode, because the abstract is the place to do that. So just focus on what your findings actually mean. Highlight how your work can be used or applied or extended. And you could think about here, how might practitioners or research or policymakers benefit from these insights. Then you need to outline the implications for further research. Again, that should also go into your conclusion. And it could be that there are questions that remain unanswered or new avenues that your study opened up. So yeah, it really helps to situate your work within a broader scholarly conversation. And just as important, is what not to do. So don't start new topics or introduce new ideas again at this stage. We don't want surprises in the conclusion. And ensure that you don't contradict any points that you've made earlier in the paper. You really need to be ending with clarity and coherence and confidence. So overall, the conclusion should leave the reader feeling that your paper has a clear purpose, a strong contribution, and a forward-looking perspective. So as we move into the sort of final stage of preparing a manuscript, I want to emphasize just how important polishing the work is. This is the point where you make sure that the paper is clear, structured, it's professional, and it's accurate before you submit it. So start by checking for incorrect grammar and spelling and punctuation. Small errors can distract readers and can weaken their trust. Look for the overall flow and the transition and the sense of the text. So ask yourself whether the argument actually moves logically from one idea to the next, and whether each paragraph leads naturally into the following one. If something reads awkwardly, then, this is the time to smooth it out. Be sure to verify the accuracy of if you have any statistical, mathematical content, because even minor mistakes can really undermine the credibility of the paper. So double checking is, really, really important. Check your references, check that every citation is complete, that it's accurate, and that it's formatted according to the guidelines of the journal. This can be quite a common problem, and it can cause delays in the process later on. So try and get it right at this point. And then just, make sure that there's consistency across the manuscript throughout. And that's around things like the terminology, the formatting, the tone, and the structure. And this is particularly important where multiple authors have been working together on a paper. You want things to be consistent and the style to be consistent. And then be aware of your own mistakes, your common mistakes. I know I certainly have certain ones that I repeat time and again. So just know what those mistakes are and look out for them. And then just a kind of word of warning about spell checker. It's just not enough on its own. It won't spot context-based errors or missing words or references that are wrong. So manual proofreading, I would say, is still essential. And finally, I would really strongly recommend having someone else read a draft. A fresh pair of eyes can catch issues that you've basically just stopped noticing. And, even better, I think if that person is somebody who's not a subject matter expert, if they can read it and essentially understand it, then I think that's a sign of an excellent paper. So yeah, overall, polishing your work is about making sure that it communicates clearly, it's accurate, and that it's professional. And that's going to give it a really good chance then through peer review. So, at this point then you're ready to submit. So remember, just a quick checklist, choose the right journal, make sure that the paper fits with the aims and the scope of the journal, and check those author guidelines to make sure that you've formatted it and used the correct reference type, just to really just to stop any kind of toing and froing or delays in that process. Okay. So I'm just going to check to see how we're doing for time. Okay. And I don't know whether at this point there's any questions, because I'm sharing my screen. I'm struggling to see.
There's no questions. There's no questions yet. I think everybody's just soaking it all in, but I want to encourage, if anyone does have questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat as we're going along, and we'll make sure that Sharon sees them. And if we don't have enough time at the end, we'll make sure that we swing back around and make sure we get those answers to you.
Perfect. Okay, so the next section is about peer review. I think this is perhaps the part of the whole publishing process that is the most mysterious, and certainly the most frustrating for authors, for reviewers, for editors, for publishers. But it's critical. It's absolutely critical. Peer review is designed to assess the validity, the quality, and the originality of our articles for publication. So its ultimate purpose is to maintain the integrity of science by filtering out anything that's invalid or any poor quality articles. And as I said, it is often the most troublesome part of publishing. But yeah, so let's take a look at some of the different peer review models. I'm aware of 4. I could be wrong, there could be more, but there are 4 that I am aware of. So first of all, there is what we call single anonymous peer review, or you may know it as single blind or double blind or triple blind. More recently, the word blind has been taken out and replaced with anonymous. So that's the terminology that we tend to use now, but you may know it as blind. So single anonymous peer review is where the names of the reviewers are hidden from the author, but the reviewers know who the author is. Double blind or double anonymous peer review is where neither the reviewer or the author know each other. The names are not visible to either party. And this is the most common type of peer review, and it's certainly the model that is adopted at Emerald. So double anonymous peer review is what the quarterly review of distance education uses. Then we have one called triple anonymous peer review, which you may be wondering, well, what on earth is that? And this is where the editor doesn't even know the name of the author. So This one is perhaps less common than the others, and I think it tends to be reserved more for some of the sort of engineering, medical, more scientific journals. But certainly at Emerald, we don't use this model. And finally, there's open peer review, and this is, I guess, this is a new kid on the block, and this is it can have many guises, but essentially it's where everybody knows everybody. You know, it's all completely transparent and open. And sometimes with this model, the peer reviewer comments are even published alongside the article. So full transparency. And yeah, it's one that I think is gaining traction, but it's certainly not common at this point. But I think we'll see more of that model. And this is what the peer review process looks like in infographic form. I don't know if I have a pointer on Zoom because I've not used it before, but can you see my mouse, my cursor moving
No,
about?
not currently. Not currently.
Okay.
I can.
Okay. Well, I can't find. What does annotate do? Can you?
And make sure you're sharing, because right now
don't
I'm
know.
not seeing a shared screen at all.
Oh,
Oh, I see her
it says I'm
screen.
screen. Okay. I'll close that little bar down. Can you see my screen now, Pat?
Still not on my side.
It's saying that I am sharing.
Let me
Yeah.
try something.
I can still see. Are you in the
well,
meeting as opposed, are you clicked on meeting at the top as opposed to Sharon's screen, perhaps? But in the
Okay.
recording, we see your screen. So
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Okay, so what I'll do then is I'll talk through this. I was hoping to point, but I'll just talk through it. So peer review session, this peer review process. So obviously it starts with submission. It starts with the author submitting their work to a journal, and that is usually on an online platform. At Emerald, we use something called ScholarOne Manuscript Central, and that is kind of an industry standard platform, but there are others. So you start with submitting on the platform. That then goes to the editor, who will send, if he will do an initial, he or she will do an initial check, and if it does fit the criteria of the journal, it will go straight into peer review. So the editor will select up to 3 peer reviewers, depending on what kind of model they prefer, and they will ask them to evaluate that manuscript. The editor then receives those reviewer recommendations back, which can take a while depending on reviewer availability. And this is often a pain point for journals. So authors can get quite frustrated at this point because, you know, we do struggle sometimes to find the minimum of 2 reviewers. So, but we do try to turn things around as quickly as we can. So the editor then receives those recommendations back and then will make the decision whether or not to reject, revise, or publish, or accept. So if it is a revise, the paper then goes back to the author and with the comments, and then it goes through the cycle again. If it's a reject, obviously at that point, the journey is ended with this journal. The author can then go to another journal, or they can choose to do, you know, some changes to their work and resubmit. And in the rare instance that it's accepted immediately, then great, you know, the paper then goes on to be published. What I would say is, going back to that submission box at the very start, the editor also can make the decision to reject there if the paper doesn't meet the editorial objectives. And a lot of papers are rejected at this point. So it is important to make sure that you really target the right journal for your work, because otherwise you will waste time for yourself and for other people as well, if you haven't made sure that it's the right fit. So that's what the review process looks like. If you get a revision request, this is actually good news. It may feel disappointing, but it's actually really good news, because it means that you're now in that publishing cycle. And if you do everything that is, asked, your paper will be accepted. So another thing to bear in mind is that nearly every paper, or certainly every author, is asked to revise at least once. And as I say, it's a positive thing, because you're in that cycle. So make a note of the revision deadline. Most publishers often give a set number of weeks for the revisions to be made. So try and stick to that deadline. If you strongly disagree with the decision, then you can get in touch with the editor and argue your case. That doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. And if you feel very strongly about that, then there is nothing to stop you reaching out and asking for clarification or explaining things, why things were done like they were done. If you're not clear on any of the feedback, then obviously seek clarification. If your work is co-authored, consult with the author group and decide how you're going to tackle those revisions between you. As I say, meet that deadline, because if you don't, it will just delay publication. And if the publisher's submission platform allows, then try and make it clear point by point how the revisions have been met. And if not, why not? So again, like I said, if your paper is rejected, it's a very normal part of the publishing process, and it happens to pretty much every researcher at some point. And if it is rejected, it's usually for a very clear reason. And common reasons include things like not following the author guidelines, and just falling outside of the scope of the journal. The research and the paper itself can be strong, but it might just be the wrong journal. Another frequent issue is around quality concerns. Perhaps the methodology wasn't rigorous enough, or it could be that the reviewers feel the motivation for the paper was weak, meaning that the purpose or the significance of the study isn't really clearly articulated. In other cases, it could be that the manuscript was insufficient in terms of its contribution to the field. And that, of course, is a key criteria for most journals. But, it's not the end of the road. Most successful researchers will experience rejection at some point. It's about, reading the feedback carefully, asking questions if something isn't clear, reflecting on what can be improved. And then when you're ready, when you've, revised the manuscript, you can either resubmit to the same journal or consider another journal that may be a better fit. But just don't give up. It's simply part of the process, and it's not a judgment on your potential as a researcher or an author. Just use the feedback to strengthen the work, really, and keep going. Okay, so when it's accepted, because it will be accepted eventually, you will get published at some point. This is a list of some of the things that publishers do. So we carry out editorial checks and improvements. We typeset and tag the work to make sure that it's searchable and that it's discoverable, by placing it on platforms with third parties, with aggregators. We work with abstractors and indexers so that, with people like Web of Science or Scopus and ProQuest, to make sure that your work is traceable and surfaceable, if that's even a word. We disseminate it and promote it through our campaigns that we do, the marketing campaigns that we run, and we have different channels to market to really ensure that it reaches the maximum audience. We invest in technology to host the articles, again, to make sure that finding that research is easy. And we also ensure preservation of your work through archive and preservation connections with Portico, Locks and Clocks, who are standard preservation companies. So to summarise, think about the outcomes before you start your research and you know, where it is that you'd like to publish. Consider the format of the research and how to, you know, best reach the audience. Not every piece of work needs to be a traditional journal article. There are lots of ways to share your insights. You know, we're talking here about articles, but, you know, it could be that you do a blog to accompany the article, or work on a podcast, or, you know, work with a publisher on a webinar. There's lots of different ways to really extend the reach of your work. When you're ready to submit, obviously use that the author guidelines really carefully. And then remember that rejection or being asked to revise your work is just part of the process. So keep moving forward, and good luck with the submission. Okay, so we're almost at the end now. This is actually the last slide, and I think we have a good 10 minutes once I've talked through this, so that we can open up for questions, and maybe Pat and Vicky and Mike want to join and talk about, you know, the special issue, but just in a nutshell, I just wanted to take a couple of minutes to look at quarterly review of distance education. It's possible, I guess, that some of you have already heard of it. Some of you may have already published in the journal. It's been going 27 years, so it's very established. And I'm pleased to say that, you know, we work with the USDLA. The journal has a very close connection with the USDLA. And you know, this is one of the reasons why we're actually running this webinar. So we want to encourage USDLA members to consider submitting an article to the journal. The URL is there on the slide. So, you know, you can pick that up later, or do a screen grab, or take a photo with your phone. It's a double anonymous peer-reviewed journal. It publishes articles, research briefs, reviews, editorials, and it deals essentially with the theories, the research and practices of distance education. Mike, obviously, is one of the editors, along with Animia Orellana, both based at Nova Southeastern. I'm getting my compass points wrong. University. And the journal is what's known as hybrid. So it means that authors can publish free of charge, and their article goes behind a paywall for subscribers. Or if they want to publish open access and they have funding, they can pay an article processing charge to make the article open access. Full author guidelines are on the journal homepage. So if this has inspired you to get published with the journal, then that's where you'd need to go to get all the details. Now, there is a special issue coming up, and Pat and Vicky are on the call to maybe just talk very briefly about that. It's on AI, the impact of AI on distance learning.
Sure. Yeah. Hi, everyone. So we are putting together a special edition, as Sharon mentioned. The name of it is going to be called Distance Learning and the Impact of AI. As everyone's aware, AI is everywhere these days, and the implications within the world of education are pretty widespread, right? Everything from the educational teaching process, especially within distance learning, all the way to the student side. You know, how are students allowed to use and leverage AI? What are some of the acceptable ways? What are some of the not so acceptable ways? but AI is certainly impacting distance learning in a big way. So we are looking for anywhere between 8 to 12 articles, right, Sharon? Somewhere in that ballpark, I think. That's what we
Yeah,
had agreed
yeah.
upon. And we have our National Distance Learning Conference coming up in June, and that is in Cleveland, the week of June 22nd. So, you know, one of the first things was to encourage anybody who's presenting at that conference to perhaps dig a little deeper into their presentation and maybe leverage that as an article to be published in this special edition journal. But we're certainly inviting folks from outside of the conference that might have some, you know, some information to share, some research they want to get published to participate. And Sharon did a great job. You know, there's a lot here. If you've never gone through the process of getting published, Sharon did a great job of taking you through it step by step. This is a peer-reviewed journal, so it's not just blindly taking your article and putting it into the journal. And Mike Simonson has been a key part of the QRDE, which has been a long-running journal that the association USDLA has been involved with. And he is going to be overseeing this journal, the special edition journal as well. And Vicki Brown, who is former president of the Florida Distance Learning Association, and she is a member of the advisory board of the United States Distance Learning Association. She is going to be an editor on this journal as well. So Mike, I'm going to turn it for you for a second. You have any comments or anything that you want to share with anybody out here regarding the special edition journal or getting published in general?
Thanks, Dr. Casella. Yeah, Sharon, thank you very much. That was an outstanding presentation, and it reminds us all of this process and how important it is. I only have one suggestion to all of my colleagues, and that is probably one of the single most important ways to become an author, especially in a journal like the Quarterly Review of Distance Education, is to read it a little bit, maybe read it a lot, and get an idea of what others are writing about. Hitchcock, when asked, where do you get your ideas for movies? He said, I watch other people's movies. So read the journal. And we editors are anxious to talk about the journal and about your research. And I found over the years that one of the quickest ways is to send the editors an email and say, what do you think of this idea for your journal? Parenthetically, I found that one of the best ways to find out about the journal is to call the editor on the phone and talk to him a little bit. We all are anxious to talk about this thing that we work on and that we think is pretty important, and that's the journal. So I don't know, I don't want to put Vicki on the spot, but if you would like to talk about the journal, give me a call. Thanks, Pat. And once again, thanks, Sharon.
Absolutely.
It's interesting that you suggest that, Mike, actually reading the journal, because the final thing I wanted to share was that the journal is free. We've unlocked all the articles and the back files for this year. So throughout 2026, anybody can go and read everything that's ever published in the Quarterly Review. So please do, visit that site, that address there, and you can find out more about the journal, find out how to submit, get the author guidelines, and also access all the content for the journal that's ever published. So I'm just wondering, I can see that there are some questions.
I've just been adding, it's mostly me. I've been adding the link. I typed the link in for people to make it just a little easier for them to access.
Okay.
We did have a question about when the call was opening. We said, well, today it's official. You all came here and you got the first look at it. I don't think there were any other questions, just people wanting the link, which we got to them. And as I said, just asking about the when they could get started. So I think we covered both of those questions.
Excellent.
Sharon, I actually do have a question for you. I think it's particularly since this is a special edition about AI. How is your company evaluating, or how receptive are they in the use of AI, for example, in the publication, doing statistical analysis? How are you checking to make sure that references are real? Because these are some of the things that are popping up right now. You know, some journals are having to backtrack a lot of articles because they're finding fake references in the use of AI. So, unethical use of AI, let's put it that way. So how are you handling those things?
So we have an AI policy, so that is on our website, so anybody can go along and view our AI web policy. It's also embedded into every set of author guidelines for every journal that we have. So this is another reason why it's important to refer to the author guidelines, because it's very clear in there what is acceptable and what is not where AI is concerned. But AI is a disruptor, and it's affecting our sector as much as it's affecting any other sector. And we feel like we are grabbing onto the dragon's tail somewhat with it. You know, we are embedding lots of tools into our online platform to detect and to weed out AI swill, as it's being called. And, you know, because we don't want to put more and more pressure on our journal editors, because we are seeing massive increases in submissions, and a lot of it is due to AI generated content, which we don't want to publish. What we're saying is if AI is used in some, for instance, if there's a journal about AI and it's, you know, then AI is used in some capacity, then it has to be declared. But we don't want to just publish AI generated articles. Absolutely not. So we are doing everything that we can at this point to try and weed those out before they even get to the editors. But yeah, it is a battle. But our stance, as is the stance of many other publishers, is that we will not publish work that has been AI generated. And we do have tools to check references and to make sure that they're not just hallucinations.
Thank you so much, because I think that it should be clear up front when we're talking about publications in journals.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially with the special issue being on AI.
Yes.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
Okay.
Awesome.
Well, that's perfect timing, I think, isn't it?
Right on the nose.
You did
Yeah.
excellent. You did excellent. So I just wanted to mention, Pat mentioned it briefly. I did put, in addition to the QRDE link, which again has all the guide, you can get to the guidelines that Sharon talked about. You can get all the information you need to get your paper started in the publishing process. I also included in the chat, save the chat before you leave. There's good stuff in there. I also included the link to the USDLA conference, because you might find your next co-author for your next paper at the conference. Because one thing we didn't mention, we said that the call was opening. If anybody wants to address that, when those papers have to be in by, or sort of what the window is, because I know that's another question that will come up at some point. So if anybody wants to take that one, don't all jump at once. You're accepting papers until.
Oh
yeah.
Question.
Hold on. I know, Sharon, you're looking at me. I'm looking at you.
I know. I've got to try and remember off the top of my head.
Basically, you have this spring and summer to be submitting your papers.
August. I think we said
they will be
end of August.
Yes. I'm trying to buy you a little time there. But yes, I just wanted to make it clear that people have a little time. This isn't you have to submit your paper tomorrow.
No.
Because I got a proposal for a conference recently. They're like, it has to be in by next week. I'm like, yeah, that's a little tight.
So here we are. So submissions open today. Submissions close on July 31st, and the final acceptance date is the 25th of September.
Okay. So yes. So just wanted to get that in there, because I know sometimes that matters for people. They're planning their calendars and their lives and things, and wanted to know that they have a little window of time there.
And for the quarterly review in general, we're soliciting papers all the time, anytime.
That's
So
right.
you can submit at any time that you have
Yeah.
a paper. Now for the special issue, that's something we want to concentrate on. But in general,
That's right.
anytime you have a manuscript that is ready, in your opinion, to be reviewed, send it in.
Yes. And as I recall, as they're reviewed, they will be published as they go through the entire process. And then the special edition is really where is sort of the bundling up of the package. So if you get your paper in earlier and it goes through the process, you may already have the information that you can share out to people that you have had your paper published, and then again resurface it once the special edition is out. That's always a nice way to kind of get a little more visibility for yourself in your paper.
Yes, indeed.
Sharon, thank you so much. This is one of the best presentations I've seen on this topic, and I've attended many of them, especially when I was a beginner researcher. It was so well done. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. Yeah. So again, just to end, please, anybody that's interested or has questions, contact me at any point. I'm happy to help you with your publication journey. So yeah, do reach out.
All right.
Thank you. I am going to end the recording. I know sometimes there's a question that sort of lingers, so don't log off right this second if my people can stay. Sometimes people have a question they didn't quite want on the recording. So
No.